Yeah, thank you. Thank you for organizing a platform where at least three manufacturers who are supposed to be one of the largest in India to come together. As you rightly said, that COVID-19 has offered us a tremendous challenge, especially for all the vaccine manufacturers to come out with a candidate vaccine at a very, very rapid speed. We are, in fact, some of our companies are in talking terms with each other to see if we can combine together to use our facilities. Here actually we don't call this as a rat race or something, because here when humanity is at risk, like we are always talking to each other to see that if we can agree on using our combined strength to bring about a vaccine at the fastest pace. In our case, we at Indian Immunologicals, there are various, as Dr. Soumya said, that there are various platforms being pursued. We have chosen a live attenuated codon de-optimized platform. The live attenuated codon de-optimized platform gives tremendous advantage for a country like ours. Especially, this vaccine needs to be administered right from children to senior citizens. So if the vaccine is going to be priced very high, then it's going to be totally unaffordable for any government. Like I heard one of our competitor vaccine companies saying that a vaccine will be priced at 1,000 rupees a dose. 1,000 rupees a dose for a country of our size. And if you want to achieve, let's say even 70%, because 70% is a number which is given to as a number for herd immunity. So if you calculate our population of our size at 1,000 rupees, it's going to be several lakh crores of rupees which will be spent on vaccination, totally not feasible. So we have taken an approach which is a very difficult approach, because in our live attenuated vaccine technology, it will stimulate both humoral immunity and cell-mediated immune response, and probably 1 or 2 doses is sufficient for, we expect that 1 or 2 doses is sufficient for the entire lifespan, and the cost would be not as high as well. So, under normal circumstances, live attenuated vaccines would take several years to develop. I mean, if you see, there are very successful live attenuated vaccines like measles vaccine, which is rubella vaccine, which is being used now. But we have modern technology called codon de-optimization. With that, with the help of our collaborators in Australia and in the US, we are now, we have almost constructed 20 live attenuated codon de-optimized viruses. We will start the mice studies in September. And then we'll do the non-human primate studies in October. And we are planning to start the phase 1 trials as early as January 2021. So the thing is, like, our approach takes a little longer because technologically it's much more challenging to do. But then when it comes as a vaccine, then we will be the most cost effective, and it'll be a vaccine where you administer once or twice and then you don't have to administer for the rest of the life. So that's the approach that we're taking. And in the meantime, we do have spare capacity. If any of our friends want to utilize some of our fill-finish capacity, they are free to approach us, and we are always happy to share our capacities.
Did you say free to approach, or did you say free to use as well? Thank you, Anand, for that generous offer.
Could I
Krishna?
just make a quick comment on the collaboration?
Please,
I mean, I was in discussions with others from the Serum Institute, and we have an association called the Vaccine Manufacturing Association, in which Indian manufacturers are part of that. And in that context, we've been in discussion over several policy issues, and this certainly came up. There's a principal understanding between us that we will deploy capacities for each other. And what's important to understand, it's not just in the context of COVID, but while we're trying to develop COVID vaccines, we have routine immunization commitments and supply commitments on ROTA, on, DPT, Penta. But it's not easy to deploy capacity with each other because of the way the regulatory system is set up. So if father wanted to say that, B, you fill my pentavalent because, I have COVID obligations, for us to do that, we have to potentially go through clinical trials, but requires a lot of regulatory work and potentially 6 to 8 months before we even are able to do that. So if we can shift the needle there, it allows more flexibility for us to be open. But I think in principle, we all want to deploy infrastructure in a way that best serves humanity at a critical time like this.
I think you put it really, really pointedly. Krishna, would you like to also comment on this idea of collaboration?
I just want to say that I'm glad you organized this meeting. We may be competing, all three of us, but we are all of us competing with infectious disease. Please keep in mind that we may compete in the marketplace, but we are competing against infectious disease. That is common goal for all of us. Yes, Indian manufacturers need the time now to collaborate more. It's easy to collaborate with the US and other people, but with India, it's a little difficult because we have cultural problems. We don't trust our own brothers, that's unfortunately. So the culture has to change. But definitely that is required. But I want to say one more important point in front of an honorable minister. India is manufacturing 100 doses. Serum Institute is only making 30. 70% of the other vaccine comes three manufacturers. Keep that in mind. That means 70% of India comes from three manufacturers. That means Hyderabad is nothing less than Serum Institute. Please keep in mind. As a single company may be different, but all three manufacturers, we are more than double than a Serum Institute as a combined strength of Hyderabad. And I want to tell you that partnership is now, the disease is getting complex. I think we need a partnership. We don't even, we are buying from tetanus from BE now. We said we have to stop importing things rather than we collaborate among ourselves. And I think it will start right now. I think the minister has organized this meeting. It brings some comfort level to all of us also in a way. But I can tell you one more thing. Telangana will lead innovation in India. Please keep this line tagged. Okay? Telangana will lead the innovation of India. There's nothing less. Because it's not that because ministry is here, I'm telling you this. I'm seeing the ecosystem that we are building in. You see this sort of ecosystem of manufacturing, R&D, very high intense. Bangalore gets unnecessarily a popularity of the media. But actually, we have better ecosystem than any other state of the country. But I think we need to see, and actually, we've done typhoid conjugate, first vaccine in the world. So that comes from Hyderabad. So a lot of vaccines. Now even B is developing new vaccine. They are developing new vaccine. Everything is going to come from here. So there's nothing less than that. And I think we are nowhere less than any other companies in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna. In fact, since this morning, I've been hearing a number of things on the innovation front and how important innovation is in your line of work. We have T-Hub in our state. We have T-Works. We have a bunch of other initiatives that start with T. But I've also realized this morning after talking to all of you that T cells are equally important. I think in this process, I think we have one more sort of an addition to this T portfolio. But before I go into other questions or other points, I think a question to all three of you. I think each of you should respond to this. See, India now and Indians now are looking forward to you guys with a lot of anticipation. We want the vaccine to be cheap and affordable. We want it to come yesterday, if not, say a month from now. That quickly we want it. We also want accessibility, and like Dr. Swaminathan pointed out, we don't want hoarding happening. We don't want only the privileged and the rich in India to be getting the first shots and them to be safer than the others. So we cannot have that divide as well. But that is the ask, that is the demand. Now the question to you guys is, what can governments do? Because I just heard Mahima say, sometimes when I want to really change gears and move fast, the regulatory framework comes in the way. Be it in the state, be it the DCGI, be it Delhi. What do we need? What do we need to do as governments to enable you? Because, like I said, we are a developing country, we are a third world country, we can't invest lots and lots of money in research and development from the exchequers or the consolidated money or the exchequers money. But how do we facilitate, how do we encourage you, how do we take away the hurdles, how do we ensure these roadblocks in your regulatory approval processes are removed? The reason why I ask is because I want to appeal to Government of India, from the industry here, from the government here, taking into account all of your viewpoints and taking into account all of your ideas and suggestions. I want to write to them, I want to request them, I want to reach out to them and be your advocate for the industry in terms of ensuring that we compete with the world on an even keel. if the world is actually moving at a brisk pace, it is primarily because they don't have as many legal hurdles, as many regulatory hurdles as we have in India. So please do vent, please do talk, please do tell us what we need to change from within, in state government here and also in Delhi. What are the things that you would like to see differently? Starting with maybe Krishna, and then we go to Mahima and then to Anand.
I think this is a very important point. The vaccine field, unfortunately, controlled 90% by the federal government, central government. That is number one. What we need as a Telangana, if you want to become a global player, we need CDSO, which is Drug Control Office, to have decentralized their power to Hyderabad. We need a South India headquarters of CDSO in the South India so that it can be Hyderabad, and that will strengthen, because we don't have, for a small clearance also, we're rushing to Delhi. It doesn't make sense for us. And the country is a big country, and 60% of the pharma is coming from here. So naturally, we need to have CDSO headquarters, decentralize some of the power, 90% of the power to be decentralized and located in Hyderabad. That will change the game for us, for Telangana. Number two, RCGM, DVT. Again, that has to be decentralized. Put a one small institute here, right in Genome Valley. They can be located here with the two offices. They clear everything except the one BSL-3 area, highly contained organism can go there. Remaining all can be done. Because this is the only country, even for small R&D, sir, we need a permission from DBT. I don't know, they are the facilitator of the country's industry, but they're also in the regulatory chair. That is hurting us actually very bad. For every small R&D material to import, we need a permission of RCGO. That is going to kill a lot of startup companies in this country. It's hurting us actually very bad. And I think RCGO, at least if they can't close down, at least they should be decentralized and put them here. Third important is, every batch that we send to CRI Kasoli, if they can set up in Hyderabad, one more testing, where state government can build that infrastructure and give it to them, they can have a testing facility here. If they do that, and I think we'll rule the country.
Thank you, Krishna. In fact, on the last point, the testing center has been approved for Hyderabad. It will be up and running hopefully soon. But we'll hear from Mahima as well what she thinks needs to be done by governments in terms of removing these legal hurdles and regulatory hurdles.
So first, sir, I would break it down into the more immediate things that can be done and some of the more institutional challenges which will take time to accomplish, but once we accomplish those, they will pave the way for more innovation, not just in the context of COVID. So first, in the context of COVID, I would really like to highlight funding. So most manufacturers sitting at this table don't have access. We're doing this at risk. We're doing this, with commercial sources of capital. It's very challenging to do efficacy studies, global efficacy and safety studies, and invest in infrastructure when there's no pull mechanism that's visible. Now, the COVAX facility is one way where they're kind of trying to give you demand certainty, but that hasn't been forthcoming from our own government, which is a bit disappointing because we need to understand what the allocation strategy of the country will look like. Given all vaccines will not be available from day one, what is the volume you need for first responders? What is the volume you need in the second tranche? What is the overall immunization strategy? Is it 60% of the people? Is it 100% of the people? So these kinds of things, and I often use these terms, pull and push mechanisms. There are no pull mechanisms. In the absence of the pull mechanism, it makes the lack of push mechanisms even more extreme. Our funding is extremely fragmented through BIRAC. Many countries, including China and the US, have fully funded at risk several programs, making sure that they have access to vaccines first, that they have access to a diverse portfolio of vaccines, and supporting companies to set up huge infrastructure. Now, this has long-term implications because India is the #1 vaccine player in the world. In not many industries can we claim to have that advantage, and I worry that by empowering everyone else in this fashion and not empowering India, we are losing in the long term a certain competitive advantage to other countries. This is easily done. The World Bank has $2 billion in funding that they're making available specifically to vaccine manufacturers to expand their infrastructure. But India needs to agree on terms to access those funds and make them available to a handful of manufacturers who have the track record to making this happen. So I've gone out on a limb here, but I think funding is a key thing. The second are the regulatory challenges. And it's not in the day-to-day clearances, because I have to say that between DBT and the DCGI, they have been proactive in reaching out and saying, if you don't get clearance in 24 hours, so has the state of Telangana. You know, I get calls. The reverse is happening, so it's actually kind of interesting to be put on the other side of things. So it's not about the day-to-day, but India still hasn't made clear the guidelines for what it means to license a vaccine. What efficacy parameters are you going to use? And FDA and WHO have published those guidelines. I know India is still working on the guidelines, but they haven't been published. This is really important, because then you measure every vaccine with the same yardstick, and then you ensure safety. So I think we immediately need those guidelines to be put in place, because manufacturers have a goal. Is it immunogenicity? Is it fourfold increase? Or do you expect efficacy, like WHO does expect efficacy? And what is that need is not being made clear. And the third challenge, I would say, is really this issue of allocation, which I touched upon. And that issue of allocation is not just a pull mechanism, but it's extremely important in the context of India contributing to the global equity, to global equitable access. And I just want to sign off by saying that from our standpoint, our philosophy has been that we ensure equitable access. For us, all children are created equal, and we want to make sure that the price of the vaccine doesn't come in the way of a country making a decision to adopt the vaccine. We will do everything possible to make sure the country is incentivized to adopt the vaccine. Now, when it comes to institutional challenges, they're more fundamental. We don't have enough clinical trial sites and infrastructure in the country to rapidly deploy 15 different vaccines into different clinical trial cohorts. We don't have access to discovery-related infrastructure. Like right now, to do the non-human primate challenge studies, all of us are standing in line, and that's very hard to access. And the third one is the regulatory framework. I heard someone refer to this in an article, calling it the bureaucratic cholesterol. So we need some kind of anticoagulants to unblock that bureaucratic cholesterol in the long term to be very effective.
I've heard many things, but I've never heard bureaucratic cholesterol. That's interesting. I'm going to use this term a bit more now. Thank you.
సెరెనిటీ మోడల్ హై స్కూల్ విద్యార్థులకు అమ్మఒడి, సామాన్యులకు అందుబాటులో ఉన్న బడి సెరెనిటీ. మేడ్చల్ జిల్లాలో మేటిగా నిలిచి సాటిలేని ఫలితాలను సాధిస్తున్న #1 స్కూల్ సెరెనిటీ. మా ప్రత్యేకతలు: ప్రతి విద్యార్థి పట్ల వ్యక్తిగత శ్రద్ధ, యాక్టివిటీ బేస్డ్ లెర్నింగ్ అండ్ డిజిటల్ క్లాస్ రూమ్స్, కంప్యూటర్ ల్యాబ్, 100% ఫలితాలు, స్పోర్ట్స్ అండ్ కల్చరల్ యాక్టివిటీస్, యోగా, అబాకస్ మరియు వేదిక్ మ్యాథ్స్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్. ప్లీజ్ విజిట్ Serenity Model High School, Nagaram. Admissions are in progress. Call 04027146899 and 04027148699.
No, not at all. In fact, I think it's some plain speak is sometimes much required than what we would like to believe. Thank you very much for that perspective. And another take home for me is, you said all children are created equal. I think all humans, all children, all of us are created equal. It's just that the access and the affordability piece, I think that is what has been a huge challenge. Now, let's go to Anand. Anand, a lot of times people assume that since you're named Indian Immunologicals, you're actually owned by the government. But, but I think you should give us a perspective of how your experience has been in dealing with the regulatory framework, the regulatory roadblocks, etc. Tell us what needs to change. Tell us how a state can be your partner in terms of ensuring that your voice is heard in Delhi and action is taken, especially in these testing times.
Thanks a lot. And first, let me start by saying that there has not been one meeting in the country. There are only 7 serious vaccine manufacturers in the country. There's not been one meeting held where all these 7 people have been brought together into one room and try to even understand where we are related to in terms of R&D. And see, the country has a lot of infrastructure built. in terms of science. But they're all in silos. You have a lot of academic research institutes across the country, but then you have vaccine manufacturers. There's not been any attempt to bring them all together. In the sense that if this was done, then probably we could, as Mahima said, today, even for small testing, we have to send outside the country for testing. But we have within India, we have a lot of research institutes which belong to DBT and CSR, which could come and help us in terms of providing various, in terms of developing any test methods or helping us with some process development issues. So that kind of bringing together all the vaccine manufacturers along with some leading academic institutes would to an extent help us a lot. Next is Mahima touched upon funding. As you said, we don't see any pull mechanism because each of us, as of now, we are just trying to spend from our own pockets, not even knowing like how much of this is going to be taken up later. And so there has to be some kind of a mechanism which would at least help us de-risk in this funding mechanism. The third is the regulatory, which Dr. Ella talked about. True that today, under normal circumstances itself, reaching out to the regulatory authorities is very difficult. And now, especially in COVID times, it's not feasible for us to travel to Delhi as frequently as we did. So if some kind of a decentralization of that can happen, especially if some of those authorities can be given to Hyderabad, then that would definitely help us in our development process and also regulatory approval process.
Fantastic. In fact, I heard three words very clearly: decentralize, funding, and be flexible. These are the three messages I think for the government, from the industry. I think these three things, if we can take care of, I think more and more can happen. I don't know if we still have Dr. Swaminathan with us. Is she on, Shakti? Is she still with us? Dr. Swaminathan, I'm not sure if you're with us. If you are, ma'am, I'd like to ask you one quick question. Or before she joins us, in fact, we can possibly have, another question taken as well. Mahima, one of the things again that was discussed during the course of the discussion today is about capacities. Now, like you mentioned 80 to 100 million doses per month that potentially can be manufactured as and when you get the approval after phase 3. We are a country of 1.3 billion people. I think the entire country is looking at vaccine manufacturers with a great deal of anticipation. How do you see the timelines in terms of rollout, in terms of how our capacities can be expanded, etc., and how quickly can we ramp up to cover, firstly, obviously, the most vulnerable, and then maybe cover all sets of people across the country? How do you see that panning out?
So this really would vary from technology to technology, sir, because some technologies have inherent limitations. So cell culture-based technologies are harder to scale. So for instance, if you're in cell cubes or cell factories, then you need to adopt to fermentation to be able to scale much more rapidly and quicker. So there's one on the drug substance side, what we call the upstream side. And I think on the upstream side, the only way to scale in a time-bound fashion is to collaborate and to look to contract manufacturing capacity and so on and so forth. Because to set up a drug substance facility from scratch is going to take a minimum of 18 months. And I'm being extremely optimistic by saying it's 18 months. So that's not going to happen. So the only way is to look at, who has microbial fermentation facilities, who has cell culture facilities, how quickly can I collaborate? And if you see the AstraZeneca model, that's exactly what they've done. They have a manufacturing site in US, in Europe, and in India. So when we think about it, we need to think, more locally as well as globally to look at how we expand drug substance. In our case, we would be able to deploy other infrastructure or other programs, assuming that it doesn't cause a disruption to routine immunization. We could deploy other infrastructure to do campaigning. But one thing that remains common as an infrastructure that everybody needs is going to be fill-finish capacity. Today, one of the big concerns is, will there be enough glass tubing? Will there be enough vials in which you put the vaccine? We really haven't had this scale of expansion or need for vials ever before. So for even the back-end support manufacturers to be able to supply materials is still going to be a challenge, something that we'll have to see, so, such that they are not allocating to the highest bidder, so to speak, right? But the one infrastructure that's common to all of us is fill-finish infrastructure, because majority of these vaccines, barring a few which are nasal sprays or attempting to be nasal sprays, they're all injectables. And creating that additional fill-finish infrastructure right now will enable us to deliver those 8 billion doses in the most rapid fashion possible, because that will be rate limiting at one point, where the drug substance can be scaled, but you won't be able to fill it in vials. So from a manufacturing perspective, we're trying to do everything we can by looking at 20-dose presentation, 30-dose, having preservatives that, will take us through a much larger vial. But what I've been, trying to advocate for, particularly with DBT and such, including CEPI, is to say create a fund where people can access money to expand their fill-finish infrastructure. And why is this a good thing? There's no downside risk. Even if your vaccine candidate doesn't work, you can ensure that that infrastructure is deployed for whichever vaccine candidate that works. So, it's not a win or lose situation for the government to make a bet on. But these are very critical to be able to rapidly scale. And the third thing, and very important factor, is availability of trained manpower. Right now, we envisioned creating an additional 500 jobs within the next 6 months. But we really need skilled workforce, and that's a long-term thing as well. But these three things will enable us to rapidly scale.
Thank you, Mahima. In fact, I think it's not a zero-sum game, is what Mahima says from the government perspective. Krishna, before we get to Dr. Swaminathan, who will possibly join us a bit. She's gone? Okay. Before we go to her, I think it looks like she's left us. But equitable distribution. I know you are on the verge of phase 3, possibly end of this month. So since we are looking at you with a great deal of optimism, how do we ensure as a country, 1.3 billion people, we know your abilities to manufacture, we know that there is always a limitation, certain cap on how much you can manufacture. How do we ensure that this equitable distribution just doesn't remain in the paper and, like Mahima said, the highest bidder? Because I've heard you in other webinars where you said, Chinese government came in and blocked the entire South American market on some other vaccine development process. How do we ensure that such a thing does not happen, and how do we ensure Hyderabad, being the vaccine capital of the world, how do we ensure we assert our position? How do we ensure we not only supply for India, we also manufacture and supply to the rest of the world in a very equitable fashion? How do we do that?
I just want to blame the government for that matter, honestly. The reason is the government is looking at it more on a health point of view, COVID problem. But I consider it's an economic point of view. If somebody is starving with the loss of a job and starving, he's going to die. That's much worse. And the WHO and the Indian government, the drug controller, looks at what is 1% adverse reactions and all that. But they're not looking at it. How do we deploy faster? It is possible. Technology now, new technologies, and all the manufacturers, we have all the quality control systems in place. There's nothing that we short circuit anything. But I think government has to sit in the central government and call the manufacturers. Tell me what you want. Each one they're working in compartmental. They say we are fast track, we are fast track. But all put together, no fast track in the country. So literally, it is an isolation. Each one want to look at microscope. How come this Indian company can develop this COVID vaccine? Let me look at it. If it comes from US, no scrutiny, much. But I think that system has to be put now. Our Chief Minister has to put a pressure on the Prime Minister's office. Something the drug controller and DBT, all of them, Principal Secretary should sit together, call the manufacturers, quick strategy discussion, and how do we execute. There must be one leader there should be executed. If it is done, honestly, I'm telling you, all the 4 manufacturers, 3 from here, Serum, can feed the entire 1.2 billion. Coming to affordability, trust me, I'm telling you, We are lesser than water bottle cost of vaccine. so, so water bottle is more expensive.
I'm sure the vaccine wouldn't be as much, 330 ml.
This is 5 times more expensive than your vaccine. So we are really offered. I think we are the lowest in the world. And the best quality. Trust me, I'm telling you. Our quality of a vaccine, Indian manufacturers' quality of vaccine, and GSK and Sanofi is exactly same. Please keep in mind, we follow exactly WHO, TRS, and US FDA guidelines. Nothing less. People think Indian vaccine means something low quality. No, all are same quality. There's only one quality in vaccine field. There's no two quality. So only one quality, be assured of that. And I think, there's some strategy discussion missing. Leadership is missing in Delhi to take on, quickly sit together and put a strategy. Chinese, what they've done, they've given $1 billion to Mexico, blocking the entire Latin American market. They went to Egypt, they're blocking the African market. I really think in 5 years, the Gavi may not exist, UNICEF also may not exist. The way Chinese going and dominating the country's market. It's very scary.
Krishna, in fact, I agree with you on two things here. First thing I think is Government of India really needs to take all stakeholders, including the states and the manufacturers, into confidence, strategize together. Instead of saying just 1 billion doses over a period of so many days or months or so many weeks, we need to strategize on not only on vaccine distribution, but also when we go into that phase where we have to test larger population. I think we need strategies, we need to test all corners of the country, and we need to ensure that the vaccine is made available. Secondly, on Krishna's point, I can vouch for it, because I have been to his lab today on the, biosafety level 3, BSL 3 standard lab. Not just a lab, in fact, the manufacturing facility. I'm told it's one of its kind in the world, not just in India, but it's one of its kind in the world. I am delighted and thrilled, to have witnessed something of that caliber and that standard in Hyderabad. I'm sure other labs are also, labs are of BSL 3 level, but manufacturing at BSL 3 level is also something that is truly unique. So we can certainly compete in terms of quality, in terms of cost, in terms of scale with everybody else in the world. So I also agree with you on the fact that we need to possibly position ourselves, brand ourselves, and talk up in the sense of Government of India and the state governments promoting you and encouraging the local manufacturers. Now, Anand, on this issue of equitable distribution, I've heard Prime Minister Modi talk about how we could possibly how we should possibly start planning now to distribute this vaccine to the large population of our country. What are your thoughts? And then we go to final comments from each of us, each of you.
As you rightly said, we need to ponder on this. It's not just developing a vaccine, and then how do we address this 1 billion population who have to be immunized, because from a child to a senior citizen has to be given this vaccine. So in terms of, each company, currently what we do is we have certain manufacturing capacity for existing vaccines.
నాణ్యతకు నమ్మకానికి మారుపేరు సాయి మహేంద్ర ట్రేడర్స్ హోల్సేల్ అండ్ రిటైల్ మరియు కిరాణా జనరల్ స్టోర్. మా వద్ద అన్ని రకాల నిత్యావసర సరుకులు సరసమైన ధరలకే లభించును. స్వచ్ఛమైన నాణ్యమైన బియ్యంతో పాటు అన్ని రకాల సరుకులు హోల్సేల్ ధరలకే రిటైల్ అమ్మకం. అనువైన ధరలలో నాణ్యమైన వస్తువుల కొరకు సంప్రదించండి. సాయి మహేంద్ర ట్రేడర్స్ హోల్సేల్ అండ్ రిటైల్ మరియు కిరాణా జనరల్ స్టోర్. మా అడ్రస్ నాగారం టు కీసరా మెయిన్ రోడ్, రాంపల్లి ఎక్స్ రోడ్. కాంటాక్ట్ నెంబర్ 9247575485 మరియు 6300322583.
We produce various kinds of vaccines for the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and then what now we are doing is some of those spare capacities is what we are going to use for when this COVID vaccine candidate comes. So we are going to use some of the spare capacities that we have. So the amount of spare capacity that exists in each of the vaccine manufacturer, that is not determined yet. I mean, even if any vaccine, say if Dr. Ella was to develop the Covaxin, and if there's additional capacity required, so far no attempts have been made to even understand how much spare capacities are available with other manufacturers. Now that I heard from Mahima that they're going to produce 80 million doses a month, and they are worried about their inability to fill finish. I'm happy to offer, we have put a brand new fill finish facility just 7-8 kilometers from here, which can fill 200 million doses if it is a 10-dose vial, and if it is a 20-dose vial, it will be much more than that.
You guys need to meet more often, I think.
So some kind of a dialogue among vaccine manufacturers should happen, because it's not about a race as to who comes out with the vaccine first, who makes the most money, or it's not about that. It's like, how do we address, I mean, if you see in terms of the size, today you see the polio vaccine program is supposed to be the biggest, but that's catering to only 27 million. But today you're talking about 1 billion people, and what mechanism is there in case if a candidate comes, how are you going to mass produce, and then how are you also going to distribute across, and if it's going to be a vaccine which has to be stored at -70 or beyond, then really we lack the infrastructure for those kind of things. So I think some high-level planning at the center has to happen to ensure speedy development, also adequate distribution across the country.
Well, I can't speak for center, but I assure you of this. We will plan for our state. We'll plan for because you guys are manufacturing right here. I think it's only a matter of local pride, and also a matter of social responsibility that we also take care of the state that we're working in. So I certainly promise you this, that we will strategize for our state. Our health department and our Honorable Chief Minister, of course, has been talking about it, but I think a well-laid plan needs to be in place in terms of ensuring the infrastructure to even store, like you pointed out, Anand, the vaccines, and also distribution. How do we do it? Entire 4 crore people, that needs to be planned. Now, since this is the first time all three of you are coming together onto a platform, we did a little bit of a survey. I tweeted, I said, what are the questions that you would like answers to, etc. The one question that came on tops, which I think you all can guess, that will be the last question for all three of you. See, it's like looking at a crystal maze and answering this one. Maybe you have more solid basis and solid grounding to answer this than any of us in this room right here. We'll start with Mahima. The question that is on everybody's mind: when is the vaccine likely to come out, right? And how long is it going to be effective for? I think it's a tough question, I know, but I think I would want your educated, because since you're in this, since you've been in this business for decades, I want a very simple, to the point answer on when do you think it will happen, and how do you think it's going to pan out from there on?
Between Q1 next year and Q3 next year, you should start to see at least 5 candidates get licensed.
Q1 and Q3.
Yeah.
That is January.
Jan to
anywhere between,
the third quarter.
And
this I mean anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world,
yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. So I think that how long really the epidemiology of the virus is not known. So will it be a seasonal, like a flu shot that you have to take every year because it's mutated enough that it warrants redevelopment, or is there enough persistence to last a year? Now, one of the trade-offs is everybody wants a single-dose vaccine because it's easy to administer. Now, all single-dose vaccines may not be as persistent. So it's really a trade-off between number of doses, persistence, and all of that. Time will tell. I'm afraid I couldn't predict anything on persistence at this point.
So Q1 to Q3, and you're saying it could either be in the form of a annual shot like for flu, or it could be depending on the epidemiology, could be a 5 years.
Depends. Typically, we would have done this all before licensure, but given the risk, we're going ahead and licensing, so we'll only know post-licensure of a vaccine how long the duration of protection lasts.
All right, thank you. And let's go to Anand. Anand, Mahima says Q1 to Q3 next year, and Mahima also says it could be, depending on the epidemiology of the virus, it could vary.
See, as I said, we have taken the most technology challenging route to this particular vaccine candidate development. I mean, bearing in mind that when it comes as a successful candidate, that it offers tremendous advantages over other vaccines, because one, the cost will be low. Next is it would provide lifelong immunity, which we hope that would do with a single dose. And we are hoping that somewhere between, because it's a live attenuated codon de-optimized vaccine, we are hoping that somewhere between Q2 to Q3, we should have something in our hand.
Q2 to Q3. And you're saying that your vaccine will have a potentially longer impact and it will be more affordable.
Yeah, because it stimulates, there's a lot of published literature how a live attenuated vaccine works, because it stimulates both humoral and cell-mediated immunity, and also a very good memory as well. So we are hoping that one or at the most two shots will protect for lifetime.
Thank you, Anand. Krishna, we'll let you have the final word. I know you're working on 3 different vaccines in 3 different parts of the world. Tell us what you believe is going to come out first. Also tell us how you see this remaining effective and the efficacy of the vaccine per se. How do you see that also helping us?
I think globally by next year, at least 10 to 15 vaccines will be there in the market, different platforms. But this is the first time cancer biologists are getting into the vaccine field. This is very surprising things we're seeing, a transition. And now they are bringing their adjuvant, their strategy of immunity is bringing into the vaccine field now, first time. So what we have is right now is the TH2 response. And now people are realizing TH2 is no use. We need TH1, cell-mediated response. That's a good sign, already figured out that. So when you have that figured out, now adjuvant will come in, live vaccines, other things will come in, and that will take place right now. And people will figure out whether maybe live combined with inactivated, inactivated with live, all these combinations will come out. By next year, they'll figure out the science. And I'm very optimistic, because the intensity of the research, first time I'm seeing so many companies getting in, and the immunology will build up. See, something earlier, immunology was working separately, vaccine field was working separately. This is the first time I'm seeing integration of the both right now. And I'm very optimistic that you're going to see, and people are going to follow whoever, suppose we vaccinate the phase 1 trial, we're going to monitor them next 2-3 years. And we have done typhoid conjugate, we monitored 5 years, it's gone down, then immediately we shot with another booster, again shot it up. So we follow them, those people. It's not that the clinical trial is over, we left off the patients. We're going to monitor them continuously. And when they goes down, we're going to understand again science. So clinical research is going to be an important field right now in this, more than the biological R&D angle. More than R&D, it's going to be clinical research, which is going to tell us a lot of things.
Understand. But the dates that you're looking at, the timelines that you're looking at?
I think the media is there. I don't want to comment. I'm very scared of that.
Well, we've said enough for them to cover. But listen, the good news is this. The good news, I believe, is that there will be a vaccine. Now, that's what the industry seems to think. That's what they're confident about. Now, the not so good news is that we may have to wait. We may have to wait for another 6 months or 9 months or 12 months, depending on whose perspective and what prism you're looking through. So therefore, we have to ensure, as Dr. Soumya Swaminathan pointed out so eloquently, she said the new normal, the new way of life that we all have to get used to, the physical distancing, the masking, the ensuring that we sanitize, ensuring that we don't pass the infection, ensure that the government test, and also continue to isolate, continue to flatten the curve as we've been talking about for a while. All of these things are points that you will keep hearing over and over the next few months. Once again, I compliment the entire life sciences ecosystem in the state of Telangana and particularly in Genome Valley here. You guys are, like I said earlier today at Bharat Biotech, you guys are no less than the frontline warriors, because you've been exposing yourself to these viruses, these microbes which potentially have a huge detrimental effect on your health. But you've been fighting this battle, and you give us that ray of hope. You give us that absolute faith that positive things are around the corner. So my compliments to the entire life sciences ecosystem in Genome Valley. Once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, who joined us from Geneva, the Chief Scientist of World Health Organization, and Mahima Datla of Biologically for joining us. Ma'am, thank you. I was just about thanking you, but I have one last question before we sign off. One last question. Ma'am, you've done extensive work in tuberculosis. Your research is, considered pioneering and benchmarking. I'm sure your expertise and your experience with tuberculosis definitely also, gives you a lot of positive inputs going down further in view of COVID as well. One question I do have. As World Health Organization's chief scientist, how can you ensure that there is no hoarding? You know, how can we ensure that vaccine, whenever it comes up, how do we ensure that it doesn't go to the highest bidder? Like you pointed out during SARS and H1N1, some countries have hoarded only when they've realized that the epidemic is not as strong as they thought it would be. Only then they decided to, be generous and share it with other developing nations. How can we ensure that the most deserving, most needy, irrespective of their geographic location, get the vaccine ahead of anybody else, and then it goes on in that order of priority? How can WHO play a pivotal role in working with various governments across the world? And how can we in India and how can we in Telangana also possibly play a role, active role, along with WHO, in ensuring that this process is expedited for the benefit of humanity?
Thank you for this very interesting session that I was following. The last question you asked me is actually a very good one, and one that I think everyone has to ask themselves. Ultimately, it is the 194 countries of members of the World Health Organization that need to come together and take a decision on which way they want to proceed. Equitable and fair distribution of vaccines and other health products that are being developed for COVID. One of the things that we launched in May is something called the CTAP. That is a COVID Technology Access Pool. This is to encourage governments as well as companies to pool their technologies and intellectual properties, anything related to COVID. It also includes data, research, knowledge, but could also include patents on vaccines and on drugs. And we hope that this technology access pool will be a mechanism for people to be able to share their discoveries and share their knowledge freely, so that more people can be benefited. And we have seen this happen actually in a large number of cases. People have actually created something and said, this is for use and benefit of the public at large. When it comes to drugs and vaccines, which are developed mostly by private companies, things become a little more complex. And the usual practice is for those companies to retain IP. So we have to see here whether we can change that paradigm. And even if IP is retained, there should be technology sharing. Because in the case of vaccines, it's really a question of the know-how. And finally, it's the political leaders who will make the decisions, because every country is governed by their own laws and their own leaders, their parliament or governance structures. And they can take decisions which are a sovereign right. So the hope really here is that they put the global needs above their own national needs, since the virus does not respect borders. And we know that the economic fallout globally is so huge, it's like running into trillions of dollars every month, that the amount of investment to both develop and distribute a vaccine is going to be in billions. We're asking for about $30 billion for the COVAX pillar in order to develop and distribute vaccines to the whole world. So it's only a fraction of the actual economic losses which are occurring because of COVID. And even if one country is able to protect their entire population, it's not going to help, because the infection is going to keep moving and traveling between countries, as we have seen. So it is in everybody's self-interest to ensure that there is sort of a global access to whatever tools are being developed. So let us hope that the global solidarity takes precedence over vaccine nationalism. And so what we would like to see is solidarity and vaccine multilateralism, where wherever, regardless of where vaccine is developed, whichever country, it's made available to the world, based on some of the criteria that we had talked about earlier. And I'm sure that India would be a leader in that philosophy and that goal. The Prime Minister has often spoken about innovating for not only Indians but for the world. And so we should actually be in the forefront of advocating for this and also for following this principle and helping other leaders also take the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for taking the time out and actually giving us sharing a lot of thoughts with us. Once again, I promise all three of you, the industry leaders here, that we will continue to champion this angle of decentralize, fund, and also be flexible in terms of our regulatory framework with Government of India. We will be your advocate from state government in ensuring that your voice is heard and the life sciences ecosystem in Hyderabad and Telangana is further strengthened. So thank you very much, Dr. Swaminathan. Thank you, Mahima. Thank you, Anand, and thank you, Krishna, once again for joining us. Look forward to strengthening and augmenting our ecosystem here. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
రియల్ ఎస్టేట్ రంగంలో నమ్మకానికి మారుపేరుగాంచిన సంస్థ ఎస్ఎస్ స్వర్ణ వెంచర్స్ సొంతింటి కలను సాకారం చేసేందుకు అన్ని రకాల హంగులతో అతి తక్కువ ధరలో ఫ్లాట్లు అందజేస్తున్న సంస్థ ఎస్ఎస్ స్వర్ణ వెంచర్స్. కీసర నుండి భోగారం వెళ్ళు రహదారిలో ప్రశాంత వాతావరణంలో 6 ఎకరాల విస్తీర్ణంలో ప్లాట్లను అందుబాటులోకి తెచ్చింది ఎస్ఎస్ స్వర్ణ వెంచర్స్. అన్ని సౌకర్యాలు అతి చేరువలో అతి తక్కువ ధరలో అందరికీ అందుబాటులో గల ఈ అవకాశాన్ని వినియోగించుకునేందుకు వెంటనే సంప్రదించండి. మంచి ఫ్లాట్లను ఎంచుకోండి. ప్లీజ్ కాంటాక్ట్ 9030232291 మరియు 9491